Strawson himself suggested that we should speak specifically of the second category as moral, arguing that it is the impersonal or vicarious character of the attitude that entitles it to this qualification. But I suggest that we discard this suggestion, seeing this view of morality as morality in its narrower sense, and seeking a broader sense focus rather on the indicated practice as such. On his claim to have identified a general framework of attitudes that we are given with the fact of human society, a complicated web of attitudes and feelings which form an essential part of the moral life as we know it. By attending to this range of attitudes, we can recover from the facts as we know them a sense of what we mean, i.e., of all we mean when, speaking the language of morals, we speak of desert, responsibility, guilt, condemnation, and justice. What does the moral life thus understood exclude? Significantly, Strawson refers to what he calls the objective attitude, which he sees as profoundly opposed to the involvement or participation in a human relationship that these attitudes share. To adapt the objective attitude to another human being is to see him perhaps as an object of social policy, as a subject for what in a wide range of senses might be called treatment, as something certainly to be taken account, perhaps precautionary account of, to be managed, or handled, or cured, or trained, perhaps simply avoided. Adopting the objective attitude, writes Strawson, is a consequence of our viewing the agent as incapacitated in some or all respects for ordinary interpersonal relationships. There are several gains in viewing morality in this broad way. First, it offers, as a sociological agenda, a way of identifying and investigating multiple moralities as species of a common genus, exemplifying varying ways in which these attitudes are manifested in different cultural and social contexts, in which some attitudes may be more or less predominant and others even absent. Indeed, one can view the reactive attitudes as constituting a transhuman repertoire, an arc of possibilities from which different moralities draw, emphasizing some and de-emphasizing others, sometimes to the point of suppression or exclusion. It also enables one to see where the objective attitude is at work, sometimes in ways that do not involve the suspension of ordinary reactive attitudes, as when inflicting punishment or treating, say, the mentally ill, but sometimes in ways that do, as when, say, racism involves social exclusion. In this way, the approach offers a kind of bridgehead into the understanding of alien moral worlds, about which one can ask what are the distinctive grounds within them for experiencing and exhibiting moral sentiments, and the limits to doing so. One may of course wonder whether at least some of these reactive attitudes so described are not themselves culturally specific rather than natural to humans. Strawson himself commented on the increased historical and anthropological awareness of the great variety of forms which these human attitudes may take at different times and in different cultures, and declared that one should therefore be chary of claiming as essential features of the concept of morality in general forms of these attitudes which may have a local and temporary prominence. No doubt, to some extent, my own descriptions of human attitudes have reflected local and temporary features of our own culture. But he concluded, an awareness of variety of forms should not prevent us from acknowledging also that in the absence of any forms of these attitudes, it is doubtful that we should have anything that we could find intelligible as a system of human relationships, as human society. Which leads me to a further advantage of this account of a distinctively human framework, or web of reactive attitudes, for it offers, I suggest, the most helpful and comprehensive way of conceiving of human uniqueness in the active current debates about morality in animals. Thus, Fran de Waal has asked the rhetorically intended question: what is different about the, the way we act that makes us, and not any other species, moral beings? De Waal stresses the continuity between human social instincts and those of our closest relatives, the monkeys and the apes, and in general, the profound similarities between human and animal behavior, e.g., maternal care, sexual behavior, power seeking. He has advocated anthropomorphism, the description of animal behavior in human, hence intentionalistic terms, as a strategy for the description of animal behavior, not as a projection of human emotions and intentions onto animals, without justification, explication, or investigation, but with the scientist's goal of arriving at testable ideas and replicable observations. Specifically, he has focused on empathy, targeted helping, also found among dolphins and elephants, reciprocal altruism, and he claims fairness among monkeys and even gratitude among chimpanzees. Needless to say, much of this is highly controversial, not only among animal scientists, but also among philosophers. Thus, the Kantian Christine Korsgaard robustly asserts that what is key is the ability to be motivated by an ought. The non-human animal, she claims, has purposes given to him by his affective states, whereas the capacity for normative self-government and the deeper level of intentional control that goes with it is probably unique to human beings, and it is in the proper use of this capacity, the ability to form and act on judgments of what we ought to do, that the essence of morality lies, not in altruism or the pursuit of the greater good. And she observes that for Adam Smith, too, the impartial spectator, the man in the breast, is at work judging the propriety of our feelings and motives, when, that is, it is proper for us to experience them, and thus enhancing our capacity to be motivated by thoughts of what we ought to do and ought to be like. And Philip Kitcher too, while noticing that de Waal's argument relies on the sentimentalist tradition in ethical theory in suggesting that the animals in question display sympathy or altruism, observes that this is not yet morality, that what is needed is a capacity for normative guidance and self-control. For sympathy, even when enlarged, is not enough. For without a device such as the impartial spectator, there are only limited and idiosyncratic sympathies, types of psychological altruism that may be necessary if moral responses are to develop, but fall a long way short of morality, not least because altruistic dispositions are too weak, often of the wrong kinds, and because conflicting altruistic impulses need adjudication. My suggestion is that Strawson's scheme of reactive attitudes offers a really helpful way of identifying moral dispositions by showing that device at work engaged in determining when one or another such attitude is proper, and thus when and how to respond to others' attitudes towards us, when to hold whom responsible for injuries, and how to distinguish attitudes of goodwill, affection, or esteem on the one hand, or contempt, indifference, or malevolence on the other. In this way, it provides an effective way of discriminating, given all the evidence which concepts appear applicable uniquely to humans, such as resentment, indignation, guilt, and shame. It also enables us to distinguish between different ways of understanding those concepts that appear applicable across the human-non-human divide, such as empathy, sympathy, and the like. Such concepts can be given, so to speak, a thinner or a thicker interpretation. Thus, sympathy among apes and chimpanzees is not only, as Kitcher has argued, limited and idiosyncratic in intensity, range, extent, and skill, but crucially lacks an adjudication device, leaving them vulnerable to whichever impulse happens to be dominant at a particular moment. And it is questionable, for instance, whether the grooming service performed by chimpanzees for those individuals who previously shared food with them registers, as Deval suggests, a psychological mechanism known in humans as gratitude, namely a feeling of thankfulness in appreciation of the kindness or perceived goodwill of another. I have sought to show in what way it is possible to see morality as socially constructed and in what way it is not. Both high and low or folk conceptions of what is moral, and thus moral and immoral conduct, are remarkably divergent across time and space. This diversity of morals is a traditional, long forgotten, but recoverable part of the agenda of sociology and social anthropology. The idea of social construction can help focus attention on the role of dominant elites and moral entrepreneurs in shaping and sustaining moral codes, and in encouraging reforms and resolving conflicts, and on investigating the limits to their moral power. But what is the diversity of morals a diversity of? Is the very idea of what is moral socially constructed in the sense that there are just different answers, or is there a common object of inquiry and research such that different moralities can be seen as distinct species of a common genus? I have argued that Strawson's notion of reactive attitudes provides a positive answer and thus presents a viable agenda for the sociology of morality. These attitudes can be seen as forming a repertoire of moral sentiments that are realized in strikingly different ways in different social contexts. The repertoire itself is not socially constructed, but a natural part of the general framework of human life. Its various social, culturally conditioned realizations are widely diverse and sometimes deeply conflicting and incompatible. What is the role of honor, pride, respect, guilt, sympathy or compassion, resentment, remorse, gratitude, forgiveness, love, shame, disgust, and so on in motivating behavior of differently situated individuals in different social and institutional settings? What, for instance, are the historical origins and social bases of different configurations of these sentiments, and their corresponding virtues and vices? How, for example, did hierarchical notions of honor become transformed into egalitarian notions of respect, with a corresponding democratization of the notion of dignity? And under what conditions do the limits of moral concern contract and expand? Recognition of the diversity of moralities is thus compatible with, indeed requires, a coherent account of what morality is. But I should add, without elaborating the argument here, to recognize such diversity is not to acquiesce in an attitude of moral relativism. Such recognition is from an observer's perspective, and the relativist makes the illegitimate inference that one can transfer one's observations into the first-person perspective of a moral agent, a participant in the practice of morality. I conclude with a final example, the case of the Nazis. From the end of the Second World War until today, the Nazis have represented for countless moral philosophers the epitome of radical evil, the paradigm of what is beyond the moral domain. On the approach recommended here, we should rather inquire both into the extraordinary success of the Nazi leaders in securing not only compliance but enthusiasm on such a large scale, and into the moral attitudes of the various kinds of Nazi perpetrators, investigating how, when, and on what basis they experienced and exhibited resentment, gratitude, forgiveness, regret, indignation, guilt, pride, and shame, and so on. We should also inquire into the limits of their morality, where the participants' reactive attitudes are replaced by the most extreme form of the objective attitude, in which other human beings are treated as beyond the human pale.